there, you're listening to episode number 9 of the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for following your curiosity, which led you here to the Estranged Heart. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. Shall we begin? But first, a disclaimer. I am not a therapist or a counselor, and nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support, such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Like every other episode, let's begin with a quote. The best way out is always through. Robert Frost. As I contemplated today's episode, it actually came on the heels of Christmas. Christmas was yesterday. And I had another episode planned and scheduled for today. And I moved that to the back burner because I felt that this was a bit more pressing. And that came because of the outreach and question I got most over the last week. And this typically happens around the holidays. The holidays are an especially difficult time for anyone going through estrangement. And the one question I get the most is the title of this episode, and that is, how do I get through this? I received several emails, especially yesterday on Christmas, but over the course of the last week, from mainly estranged parents wanting to know how to get through the heartache and pain that they were feeling by not having their adult children in their life. And while I'd like to say that while I did not receive any messages from estranged adult children, I do want to recognize that they too go through their own pain and heartache around the holidays by not having and being connected with their parents. So as I contemplated this episode and trying to figure out the best advice I can give on how to get through this pain, I thought of all the ways and things that I did, and the things that I know I've heard from other estranged parents and estranged adult children on how they got through their pain of estrangement. The initial, gut-wrenching, typically found at the beginning of an estrangement experience. And so I thought I would just share with you today things that worked for me, things that I've heard that have worked for others. Please take what works for you, what resonates with you, and if it doesn't, leave it. I am by no means saying that what worked for me is the gospel and the only way to get through this. It's not the be-all, end-all. There are billions of us here on the planet, and there are just as many ways of coping with the pain that comes with an estrangement experience. So I just simply ask that you listen to these suggestions with an open heart. I ask that you have a bit of curiosity, because without curiosity, we remain stuck in what I call sealed in one perspective, in one way, and oftentimes in life, to get through anything, through any traumatic event or any difficult challenge, we have to try different ways that we may have never thought of before, that we may have never been open to before. And I relate this back to, I spent a number of years as a labor and birth doula, and most birthing people will tell you that what they thought they would do pre-labor and delivery was not necessarily what was reality when they were in it. And so that's kind of what I'm referencing here today, is that be open to other potential options, solutions, suggestions, things of that nature. So the first thing that I can suggest is, it is something pretty basic, yet I see a lot of estranged folks fighting this, and that is to simply recognize where you are and accept that. Now I know all of you are like, I know where I'm at. I'm in the middle of estrangement, right? But to truly recognize where that puts you, right, is an important first step before you can do anything else. You have to know the facts of your current situation. And the fact is, you are estranged. Whether you're an estranged parent and your adult child has estranged from you, or you're an estranged adult child and you have estranged from your parent. Recognizing the fact that, oh my goodness, this is where I am. I am an estranged person on some level, right? And then to accept that. That's the hardest part for, and especially for estranged parents, is that acceptance. Because I think that a lot of them feel, well, if I accept this, then that must mean that I agree with it and I'm happy with it and this is just the way that it's going to be, and I just give up and accept that this is my life now. And that's not what I mean by accepting where you're at. When we can accept reality, and the reality is that you are estranged. When we can accept that, we stop fighting against it. And when we fight against something, that keeps the wheels in motion of the pain and remunerating and, the cycle of over and over and over and over, and seemingly no way out. And so when I say to recognize where you're at and accept it, it's just simply saying, okay, here I am. I am in the middle of an estrangement, and this is my reality. Right here, right now, today, this is my reality. Doesn't mean it's going to be this way forever. Doesn't mean, it can't ever change, but just right here, right now, it means this. So the second thing that worked for me was to try. I began to learn about the fact that I was experiencing trauma when my daughter's estranged from me. And looking back now, I can see it also when I estranged from my mom when I was a young adult, was that I was experiencing trauma, little t trauma. Again, I know I've talked about this and covered it before in other episodes. I don't mean, the big T traumas of war and genocide and, mass shootings and things like that. I'm talking little t traumas, and we all go through little t traumas. But it is important to recognize and understand that estrangement is trauma. To quote Dr. Gabor Mate, who is a family physician, Canadian family physician, who specializes in trauma and addiction and attachment in childhood, he defines trauma as a psychic wound that hardens you psychologically, that then interferes with your ability to grow and develop. It pains you, and now you're acting out of pain. It induces fear, and now you're acting out of fear. Trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you as a result of what has happened to you. So the trauma is the feeling that you're feeling having been estranged or having your children estranged from you. It's that feeling of rejection, that feeling of abandonment. That's the trauma. And so when you can understand that what you're experiencing is trauma, and that because of that, it's affecting the way that you are acting, when you're acting out of pain and out of fear. And so when we can try to understand that, it can put a different perspective and spin on things for you. I know that in the beginning of estrangement, it's hard to recognize these things because the pain is so intense, right? It's kind of like a physical wound when you first encounter an injury or an acute illness. The very first thing is, you can't think straight because you've got this pain and this initial shock. And things like that. And so when you're in the middle of that, you're not going to understand. You're not going to recognize and accept where you're at in your understanding of the little t traumas. But as I encourage you to try to work your way to that place, right? So it's important to understand that estrangement is a type of trauma. I learned that when I was in therapy, and the beginning of my therapy, about my estrangement experience. And it made so much sense when I was able to delve into that a bit more. Another piece is to understand that you are experiencing grief, and specifically ambiguous loss. Okay, our culture makes room. Somewhat. I mean, I tend to have a different take on this, but somewhat makes room for grieving the death, the death of someone. However, grieving ambiguous loss is something that our culture just does not understand, doesn't accept, doesn't allow for that type of thing. So, and what is ambiguous loss? Again, I've covered this in other episodes, but again, it's a loss that occurs without a significant likelihood of reaching emotional closure or a clear understanding. This kind of loss leaves a person searching for answers, and it then complicates and delays the process of grieving, which then delays the process of healing. And it often results in unresolved grief. This grief and grieving process takes time. And as most of us are aware of, there are stages to grief, and they ebb and flow. There's no, linear way of moving through grief. One day you're okay and you think you're healed and you're moving on, and the next day you're down on your knees again. And that's all a part of the grieving process. So understand that you are grieving the loss of your relationship with your adult child or with your parent. You are grieving that loss. And oftentimes, more so for the adult parent, it's a loss that they don't understand, and there is no emotional closure for. So that just it complicates an already complicated process. The next piece, and these may not necessarily be in order, but the next piece would be to allow your emotions to be, right? As you're going through that grieving process, it's super, super, super important to allow your emotions to come up and out. Now, I will say it's probably going to be better served if you can do that in healthy ways as opposed to unhealthy ways. But when you're feeling anger, it's important to get that anger out. Because when we don't feel our emotions, when we don't feel the feelings and we stuff them down and we stuff them down and we stuff them down, we get stuck. when we can let them come up and out, we can heal from that point. It's kind of, again, going back to the analogy of a wound. If it's it's got all this infection and pus and everything in it, and if we just keep putting a Band-Aid over it and, putting something over it to keep it from coming out, it gets infected. And then things go from bad to worse, as we all know from that physical stance. It's the same thing is happening with your emotions. So it's super important to get them up and out. Tears cleanse. There's a reason why you were given tears besides just, keeping your eyes moistened. There's a reason for them. Allow them to come up and out. And if you are not able to do that in front of other people, then find a place of solitude that you can. It's super, super, super important. Just as anger is important, sadness is important, crying is important, all of the emotions that come up, all of them are valid and all of them are deserving to be validated, right? Okay. Then the next step is to get curious. I talk all the time about how it's near impossible to make changes in your life, to grow and evolve as a human being without a sense of curiosity. Contrary to popular belief, curiosity does not kill the cat. It helps you to grow and evolve. It helps you to heal. So when I first went through my estrangement experience, I actually went through it kind of from a different avenue. And that was, I was estranged from my children, but I wasn't allowed to see my grandchildren. So my first outreach was, Google was my best friend. And so I went online and I Googled, grandparents kept from grandkids. And that took me to a group in Florida called Alienated Grandparents Anonymous. And from there, I started a support group in Seattle from that, and that turned into a support group for estranged moms. And so it just kind of has this trickle-down effect. But had I not been curious about how can I get through this? Again, the title of this episode. How can I move forward? How can I heal from it? How can I stop feeling this pain? Right? That's curiosity. If I didn't ask those questions, I never would have gotten to where I am today. And so I ask you to develop a sense of curiosity. Remember, Google's your best friend. Google questions that you have, right? Lots of people are not aware of estrangement, let alone how to give supportive advice or information about estrangement. Go to Google and see what you can find. Google whatever question you have in your mind, and you'll just get a plethora of information. Another thing is social media. Finding online support groups, especially in the time of COVID. We're not meeting in person as much anymore. And so online support groups are a great way to find others to help you to feel less alone. However, I do want to have this little caveat to it, and that is to be aware of the quicksand. Misery loves company, and so we can get mired down in the muck of the loneliness and the pain, and just rehashing things over and over and over again. So seek out support groups that are there to listen, to help you to feel less alone, to support you, but also encourage you and help support you to move forward into healing. Several of those support groups are online. I happen to have one of my own, and that's for estranged mothers online. I would love to be able to one day have a support group for estranged adult children who may be interested in connecting with me as a formerly estranged and now reconciled mother, where I can help support you with maybe parts of what you're missing in not having a mother in your life, in mothering in healthy ways. Another place to go online is YouTube. It's a treasure trove of presentations and free advice from professionals. And a few of those that I recommend are the Reconnection Club with Tina Gilbertson, who is a psychotherapist and estrangement expert. Dr. Joshua Coleman, who is a clinical psychologist and estrangement expert. I also would recommend checking out Dr. Gabor Mate, and that last name spelling is Mate. And he, again, is a family physician and expert in trauma, addictions, and attachment in childhood. And so there's more coming down the road on this podcast about that. But those are some places online that you can get some support, information from, and begin to learn more about estrangement. And then I would also ask that you protect yourself without shutting down. And I know that's easier said than done. When I say protect yourself, meaning, try to limit the people that you could potentially be around that may unknowingly or knowingly judge you and place judgment on you regarding your estrangement experience. I would try to steer clear of folks like that as much as possible, because that tends to shut us down, because we go into shame. When we're judged, we then feel shame, and that causes us to shut down. And it's really hard to heal when you're shut down. So my suggestion is to try to find positive, supportive folks who can say, maybe they say, I don't know anything about estrangement, but I'm here for you. I'm here to listen, and I'm here to help you any way that I can and to encourage you. And I'm willing to learn what I need to know about estrangement so that I can help support you. That's very different than someone saying, you know what, I'm tired of hearing about your estrangement. You just need to get on with life and just move on. Those things are not helpful. They're not helpful for an estranged person. It's not helpful when you're in the middle of pain. And then the final two things I would suggest, number one is therapy. I talk about it all the time. I got myself into therapy about estrangement when I went through my estrangement experience, and I am still in therapy today, and it has absolutely transformed my life. Now, that being said, as of late, I've been reading a lot of negative things about therapists in these online support groups, and I'd like to just say that I work a full-time day job. I am a practice manager for a psychotherapy group practice, and that means I work with psychotherapists every day. I also have a lot of friends who are psychotherapists, and so I have a little more insight to therapy besides just being a therapy client. I also know it from the business perspective, and I also have a little more insight as to the training that therapists go through. And so I just wanted to kind of cover a little bit of that today to help you be able to find a way to find a therapist that, to understand where a therapist is coming from, but also potentially find a therapist that can be helpful and supportive to you in your estrangement experience. Number one, therapists are trained. The way that they are trained is they are focused solely on the client. So when I hear estranged parents say, my kid's therapist is telling her to estrange from me and teaching her about estrangement, or telling him the best thing he can do is to move away from his parents, I'm here to tell you that while I can't speak for all therapists, I do know that the majority of therapists do not do that. What they are doing is supporting their client. If their client speaks of, I need to just distance myself, I can't be around my family because they're toxic, they're this, that, and the other thing, a therapist is there to help support that client. And a good therapist is going to challenge them on that and ask them questions. Why do you feel that is the best move for you? How do you think that's going to improve your life? Do you think it could potentially bring negative effects? And if so, what might those effects be? But bottom line is, they're there for their client. Just as you, as an estranged parent, when you go to therapy, that therapist is working on your behalf only, not on behalf of your children. So again, two sides of the same coin, right? And that's how they're trained. They're trained to be one-on-one with a client and working on what that client needs and helping to support that client as best as they can, and to help them to navigate their past and working through traumas and things such as that. And sometimes, as a matter of fact, I would venture to say most often, that requires people, when you're working through that kind of stuff in therapy, it oftentimes requires you to back away from people so you can get some clear perspective and begin to look at things instead of just being solely in the defensive mode, right? And fighting against something. When you can take some space back and separate from something. It's just like you've heard the saying, when an addict is in the middle of, let's just say they're living someplace where all of their friends and people that they hang out with are all addicts, and they're into drugs and crime and this type of thing, how it's really hard for them to change hanging out with the same crowd, right? It takes them removing themselves from the crowd to be able to get a different perspective and to be able to see things clearly. And I am by no means, so please do not email me and tell me I am correlating parents to drug addicts and criminals. That is not what I am saying here. I am using that as an example. Oftentimes, I knew it took me, as an estranged parent, time to step back away from my children, back away from friends who didn't understand and were giving less than supportive information to me, to be able to get a clear perspective on what I wanted, what direction I wanted to move in, that type of thing. So are therapists advocating and supporting a client in that? Yes. I can tell you that most therapists want and understand the need for children and parents to be connected, but they want that to happen in healthy ways. And a lot of parent-child relationships are not healthy. And it doesn't mean that you're abusing your children or that you as a child were abused. It just simply means that we don't always know healthy ways of being in relationship with one another. So another piece to therapist is confidentiality. When I cannot tell you how utterly rabid therapists can be about protecting their clients' identity and information, as well as it's a legal requirement. I know when people call our office and, they may say something along the lines of, my husband sees so-and-so, therapist, and I need to see if I can reschedule his appointment. If we do not have a release of information on file, we cannot tell that person who's called in, that spouse, we cannot tell them, confirm nor deny if that person is a client with our practice. That's a legal requirement. It's not because the therapist doesn't want to tell the spouse. It's not because the person answering the phone in our, as a customer service rep, it's not because they don't want to tell you. It's a legal requirement, HIPAA. It cannot be revealed. So that is just the training. And understand that if you were in therapy, you would want your therapist to hold your information confidential. So the same thing applies to your children. Again, two sides of the same coin. But therapy is a place where you can go, you can be seen, you can be validated, you can talk about all of your emotions, you can talk about how much you despise your children, you can talk about how much you despise your parents, you can talk about how much pain you're in and how, you just can't believe that these people who claim to love you are hurting you so badly, and that won't be judged in therapy. It's a fabulous, fabulous place to go and get some sort of perspective and weed out through things and, get curious about things, think about different perspectives, think about different things to do without actually having to put them all into motion, right? It's a place to think. What is possible for me? What do I want in my life? What do I want to have in my relationships? That's what therapy is for. It's to help you figure those things out. It's to help you to figure out your own past hurts and traumas. Because I'm here to tell you that every single one of us have been parented in ways that were not healthy. Every single one of us. No one gets out of it unscathed. Even the best of parents. There is something you have done, most likely it's emotional, right? Without intention, but there is something you have done to harm your children. And as children, there is something your parents have done to harm you, albeit most of us without intention, harmful intent. So therapy is a great place for that. I encourage everyone, parents and adult children, to get into therapy. And then the final thing I would suggest, when the time comes, and often it doesn't come until the end, when you've gone through some therapy, you've worked on yourself a little bit, you've been able to kind of get some clarity on the situation and things, and you're ready to transform what your experience is. And that's to work with a relationship reconciliation coach. I happen to be one of those, and I work with clients who I help them to move forward and to transform their pain into purpose. And I also am available to help them to mediate things between their loved one and themselves. So I help to mediate between the estranged parent and the estranged adult children. And I find oftentimes I'm asked to do that by the estranged adult children more than the estranged parents, because I find that the estranged parents feel like they've done nothing wrong, and therefore no one needs to mediate anything. It's the kids that need to change. But if and when you get to that place where you're ready to, like I said, transform that pain into purpose, and I know in the beginning you cannot see that. I could not see it. But I'm here to tell you, on the other side of that, it is possible, and it is a healthy way of moving forward and transforming your relationship with your adult children moving forward. So that brings episode number 9 to a close. Again, I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent, and that you're able to find some takeaways to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement or reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, and perhaps even leaving us a positive review. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email. And my email address is theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Again, theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm holding your heart in mine.